Hey guys, Tominator here. So I recently was giving this question some consideration and did a poll to get your guys' opinion. Now keep in mind, polls on YouTube only allow for 5 options, so that's why I only listed 4 names and then put someone else as a sort of catch-all at the end. But as you can see, after 6,500 votes, the results are pretty conclusive. 60% of you believe Derek Lunsford is next in line to win the Sandow. And full disclosure, I fully agree. I just didn't expect it to be such a landslide. So let's take a look at each of these names in turn, weighing the pros and cons to approximate their overall likelihood of becoming the next Mr. O. But just to clarify something, you'll notice I said the next new Mr. Olympia. By definition then, this excludes past champions like Big Ramy and Brandon Curry. For the record, I don't believe either of them will win again anyway, as neither has made significant improvements in the past little while. If anything, they seem to be trending downhill. And of course, Phil Heath is out of the discussion as well. Come on guys, let's face it, he's retired and isn't coming back. You might not have formally announced it, but once you start doing commentary, especially in your 40s with nothing left to prove, it's a pretty safe bet his competition days are over. And what about the current Mr. Olympia, you say? Let's get one thing clear, this video is not meant to throw any shade or disrespect towards Hadi Choopan, who I feel rightfully deserved the victory in 2022. But whether he goes on to lose in 23 or repeat for the next several years, he's going to be defeated at some point. That is just an inevitability. In my opinion, Hadi is what you might call a vulnerable champ. He won, but it wasn't a dominant win like Phil in 2011 or Jay back in 09. Heck, even Big Ramy in 2020 was more convincing, and he only went on to become a 2-time champ. So Hadi could easily end up being another 1-time winner like Brandon Curry or Dexter Jackson. I give him maybe 50-50 odds of repeating. Because the thing is, his smaller stature is a major limiting factor. He really can't pack much more muscle onto his frame. So if he messes up the conditioning even slightly, he could definitely be beaten. That's just my thoughts on that. But now let's start discussing some of these top contenders, some of the main people that could be considered next in line. First up, Nick Walker. Nick definitely has Mr. O potential. That's been obvious for some time now. He's massive, he's freaky, and he's consistently able to bring that coveted grainy conditioning that eludes so many of his peers. Very few can match his density from the side, and with Rolly and Phil no longer in the picture, he has probably the best arms in the world. The hamstrings are likewise remarkable, and he has some very well-defined abs and really good shoulders and back development as well. He's been steadily rising in the placings every year, and at only 28 years old, time is certainly on his side. However, I do see some issues that might ultimately prevent him from claiming the title. Number 1, those lat spreads aren't very good. The front lat spread in particular is just a bad pose for him, with the arms dominating the shot and his thick waistline and lack of taper really kind of spoiling it. He's moderately better in the rear version, but still gets beaten by most of the top 6. So that's 2 poses out of 8 that really don't go his way. The quads from the front also are not exactly top material. They lack outer sweep and don't have the best shape or separation. From the side, his legs look great, and from the rear, they're terrific. But from head on, in any front pose, he ends up looking a little top-heavy. Now, this alone doesn't preclude him from winning, since Brandon Curry managed to do so in 2019, with arguably the weakest legs we've seen from a Mr. Olympia in, say, the past couple decades. But then again, Brandon had much better flow and symmetry than Nick. Nick's blocky midsection is another cause for concern. Given the way the IFBB appears to be going lately, maintaining a streamlined midsection actually seems to matter now. So while he doesn't have a bubble gut, at least not yet, that waist is one of the widest on stage, and that's gotta hurt his chances. I also haven't seen any dramatic improvements in the past year or so, it has to be said. He looked mostly the same as in 2021, with only minor refinements. The main issues, namely that front lat spread, quads, and the waistline, haven't really been addressed, so this leads me to believe that he may have essentially maxed out on his potential already. He can't possibly continue to add much size, and the conditioning leaves little room for improvement either. So I don't see what more Nick can really offer, aside from what he's already shown us. Even still, it might be good enough, especially if some of these other guys slip up even just a little. Next is Derek Lunsford, who, as we saw in the beginning, appears to be the heavy favorite. This is my intuition as well, for several reasons. Firstly, like Nick, he's very young at only 29 years of age, but unlike Nick, it remains to be seen how much better he can get, considering he just entered the open class this year, moving up from 212. So it's highly unlikely that he's maxed out yet in terms of muscle mass. Structurally, he's far superior as well, with one of the best V-tapers in the game. This really elevates him in both lat spreads and double bicep shots. In my estimation, Derek has the best back in the world right now. This plus those razor-sharp glutes make him utterly lethal in the two back poses. And you know that old saying about Olympias being won from the back. My biggest concern for Derek is something that he's been repeatedly criticized for, which is the lack of upper body separation from the front. Ideally, you'd like to see a little more detail there, in terms of the bicep separation and the front double, or that split between the front delt and chest, or some more pec striations, just something. He typically looks too smooth upstairs, and that could prove to be the fatal chink in his armor. I would also like to see him work on his outer quad sweep and continue to add thickness so he fills out those side shots more. But given his unique circumstances and how he's just getting started in this new stage of his career, I think the sky's the limit for him and fully expect him to be crowned in the not-so-distant future. In fact, out of everyone, I believe Lunsford is the most likely to not only win, but establish a dynasty by stringing together 3 or more consecutive victories. I'm not sure anyone else competing today has that level of potential. This includes Samson Dauda, who emerged this past year as a real dark horse. At this juncture, however, barely scraping into the top 6 doesn't exactly scream future Mr. Olympia. I think people are kind of jumping the gun with that call. Let's see him crack top 3 first. On the positive side, though, Samson is huge with a massive frame and a very aesthetic-looking physique. He's extremely well-rounded in terms of not having any real lagging body parts. I guess the back is the one area that could use the most improvement, since he still needs to grow those lats in order to fill out certain shots like the front double or lat spreads. But being balanced and aesthetic doesn't necessarily translate to victory. Just look at Chris Cormier, one of the most complete physiques in history, who never even managed to attain an Arnold Classic title, let alone an Olympia. Granted, Samson isn't running up against the likes of Ronnie Coleman or Jay Cutler, but still, sometimes being super balanced can actually be detrimental because it makes you easier to overlook. My other concern with Samson is the conditioning, specifically the thick skin. Like Akeem Williams, his body, for the most part, doesn't show very deep cuts, and that's partly due to the genetic quality of his skin. Whereas bodybuilders like Phil Heath and Sean Ray before him possessed that enviable, paper-thin epidermis that showed every single vein and striation, I don't see that on Samson at all. So even if Dauda manages to nail his conditioning 100%, I doubt we'll ever see that kind of detail. As with muscle belly length or skeletal structure, this is largely a genetic trait, believe it or not, that cannot be overcome through hard work or proper contest prep alone. And in researching this video, I could not for the life of me find Samson's age, so if you guys could confirm in the comments, that'd be much appreciated. If I recall correctly, he's no spring chicken though, and is already in his mid to late 30s. Assuming this is the case, this automatically lowers his ceiling, because the older you get, the tougher it is to keep making gains, as it's more likely that you've already realized most of your personal potential. So for that reason, I don't expect to see as drastic of an improvement from Samson going forward as I would from, say, Nick or Derek. And that's not to take anything away from him, because he's arguably been the most improved bodybuilder of the last 3 years. I just seriously question whether he can sustain that rapid pace for much longer. And finally, let's turn our attention now to Andrew Jacked, Another newcomer who I feel is getting prematurely overhyped. First, the positives. Like Samson, Andrew is another massive bodybuilder with great structure and arguably even better aesthetics. For all intents and purposes, he is already Mr. Olympia from the front. Almost nobody's touching him in that front double or ab and thigh, and the lat spread is likewise elite. The most muscular isn't quite as standout, but even still, from the front, this guy is absolutely incredible, with those sweeping quads, chiseled abs, and long, shapely arms. However, from the side, he really falls off hard. The hamstrings are almost non-existent, and he really thins out in the side chest. From the rear, yes, the back itself is thickly muscled, but the conditioning wasn't there. Now, this aspect could be easily addressed, but I'm not crazy about his lower body development aside from the quads, so he'll have to bring that up and come in drier if he ever hopes to truly challenge for the title. My biggest issue with Andrew is that he's already old. Despite being a rookie, this guy is actually about 36 last I checked, so while it's still possible for him to make improvements, don't expect any overnight transformations. Again, like Samson, it's too early to tell for Andrew. Let's monitor how he does in the next few outings, and then we'll have a better idea if we're dealing with a legitimate contender or another Patrick Moore. And the reason I draw that comparison is that if you guys recall back to 2019, Patrick also made his Olympia debut to much fanfare and critical acclaim for his aesthetic attributes, but has since not gone on to do much and hasn't made any dramatic improvements. Andrew's significantly bigger, which does give him a distinct advantage in call-out comparisons, but he could end up falling into a similar boat, where his popularity and mainstream appeal simply doesn't translate into winning big shows. Yeah, so that's my synopsis on the state of these Olympia contenders. There were others, of course, who weren't mentioned, like Hunter Labrada or Michael Krzyznik, but this is a good starting point for the discussion. And keep in mind also that I'm not suggesting that only Derek could become a future Mr. Olympia, not at all. Any or all of these names has the capability of doing so one day. Lunsford simply has the best odds in my estimation. That's all I'm saying here. But please, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching. This has been the Tominator signing out, and I'll be back.